Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, joined from Israel by Dr. Michael Oren, former Deputy Minister of Israel, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, former member of the Knesset, now on the sidelines watching with great interest as we are in the final sprint to the Israeli elections. Dr. Oren, welcome back. Always good to talk to you.
Great pleasure, Hugh, as always.
Two big questions. The Prime Minister gave a map of the Jordan Valley saying he would move to annex parts of it. How important is that? And number two, he also said that it seems as though war in Gaza is inevitable to topple Hamas. How do those two stories play in your mind, and what do they do to the election dynamic?
Not much for the election dynamic, I have to say. The Israeli government, not just Netanyahu's government, has been promising to annex the Jordan Valley almost since the late 1960s. Yigal Allon, a famous Israeli politician of that period, had promised to annex the Jordan Valley. No one's done it yet. So I guess the proof is going to have to be in the pudding if Netanyahu actually moves to annex that area. And for those of you listeners who don't know, that is what is essentially a strategic divide between Israel and the entire Middle East. Is this strip of desert known as the Jordan Valley, and behind that is the West Bank. Okay, so if a Palestinian state were ever to come to being, it would have Israel on both sides of it.
Oh, so it's simply not happened thus far. Why is that? And were they afraid for impact on peace negotiations?
Well, apart from the eastern part of Jerusalem, Israel has never annexed any part of Judea, Samaria, Jerusalem, the West Bank. And East Jerusalem was annexed in July of 1967. Israel's position is that these territories are not occupied, they're disputed, and their final status will be determined in direct negotiations, initially between us and the Jordanians, and in more recent decades between us and the Palestinians. So the Israeli government's under significant international pressure, and it must be said also American pressure, have always refrained from annexing even part of these territories, even parts that are vital for our security and economy.
Now, the President of the United States is thinking about meeting with one of the crazy mullahs who run Iran, Rouhani, their president, who's powerless. What do you think of that proposed meeting?
Well, it's not playing well here. What can I say? This is a country that's sworn to destroy us, which is actually seeking to achieve that goal by surrounding us with missiles on every side, by supporting terror, denying the Holocaust. Any meeting that you give with this leader, with Rouhani, without seeing an Iranian concession, at least in support of terror, at least in withdrawing from Syria, at least from stopping the construction of intercontinental missiles that can carry nuclear warheads, without doing any of that, that will be interpreted by Iran and by the entire Middle East as a victory for the mullahs.
All right, now give us an update on the election, when they're going to be held, and what you think is the deadlock still there at the top of the order list?
Well, 5 days and counting. In recent days, the Blue and White Party under Benny Gantz has pulled ahead. It's promising to make a government without the ultra-Orthodox Haredi parties, which means that if there is to be a coalition, it would be between Likud, Avigdor Lieberman's party, Israel is our home party, and Blue and White, which also means that the Yair Lapid faction of Blue and White, which is anti-Orthodox, would also join that government. Now, that's very arcane and confusing, but my bet is still on a national unity government, and that is why Netanyahu has wanted President Trump to issue his peace plan right after the elections, before the formulation of the government, so that the peace plan can serve as sort of a cover to bring all of these different parties in under a government with Netanyahu at its helm to advance the cause of peace, which, of course, is the paramount cause in this country. So all of that, I'm sorry, there won't be a quiz after this.
Well, the prospect of not having Netanyahu as the prime minister is a little bit unsettling. What are the odds, if you are going to be a Vegas odds maker, do you think, of him returning or staying as prime minister?
I would give it a good odds, but what might happen is that if Blue and White edges ahead by several seats, it will say, okay, we'll go into a national unity government, but Netanyahu will not be prime minister. The Likud is going to the Likud party will have to unseat its head. We'll have to unseat Netanyahu. We'll sit with anybody else but Netanyahu. Or B, there'll be a rotation. A rotation, we've had that in the past in the 1980s between Yitzhak Shamir and Shimon Peres. It didn't work so well, but it's still out there. And Benny Gantz, since he won the election, will say, okay, there'll be a rotation, but I'll be prime minister first. Because if you have the prime minister's position first, who knows whether there'll ever be a second.
Is there a volatility factor, Dr. Michael Oren, where surges occur in Israeli politics on the last minute? Is there underpolling, for example, of Likud and Netanyahu? We got a minute to the break.
Well, what's happening now is a great fear of a low voter turnout. Traditionally, Israel has always had a very high voter turnout, much higher than the United States, but now there's a tremendous amount of fatigue with the political situation, 2 major elections in 6 months, and we're expecting a low voter turnout with high voter turnout for the ultra-Orthodox, and for the Arabs.
So that means not as much of a surge as Netanyahu experienced last time?
His big fear is a low voter turnout. It's interesting that our highways today are festooned with posters calling on Israelis to go out and vote. It says the logo is don't forfeit your right to exercise your right.
Next week when we talk, we'll know who won and who didn't in the Israeli elections. I look forward to that, Dr. Michael Oren. And you can go to his website, drmichaeloren.com, michaeloren.com, or Google Michael Oren. Thank you from Israel. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Citizens for Truth in Drug Pricing.